His fingers brushed hers across the cocktail table, and neither pulled away. They'd been talking for an hour about failed ventures, late-night doubts, the weight of proving yourself in rooms that don't want you there. He didn't mention his company. She didn't mention hers. For once, they weren't strategists or founders, just two people who understood the cost of ambition. "I wish we could stay here," she said, smiling in a way that made his chest ache. The next morning, the conference room door opened. Isla looked up from her notes, ready to fight for her company's survival, and saw Luca at the head of the table. What happens when the person who makes your heart race is the same person who could destroy everything you've built? The bar smelled like cedar and something citrus sharp, the kind of place where conversation stayed low and lighting stayed lower. Rain hammered the windows in sheets, turning the streetlights outside into blurred halos of gold. Isla Moreno pushed through the glass door, her coat already soaked through at the shoulders, and immediately wanted to turn around and go home. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fished it out with numb fingers, water droplets speckling the screen. "Table in the back, dark hair. I'm wearing a gray sweater. If you're not here in 5 minutes, I'm ordering the most expensive whiskey they have and leaving." Isla almost laughed. At least he had a sense of humor about this disaster. She scanned the bar, exposed brick, Edison bulbs hanging from copper fixtures, the kind of place that charged $18 for a cocktail and called it artisanal. Most tables were full, couples leaning close, groups laughing too loud. And then she saw him. Corner booth, shadows pooling around him like he'd chosen the spot deliberately. Dark hair, gray sweater, staring at his phone with the kind of intensity that suggested he was either reading something devastating or desperately trying to look busy. When he glanced up, their eyes met, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or relief that she actually showed. "Luca," she guessed, crossing to him. "Isla." He stood, unfolding from the booth in that awkward way tall people have in small spaces, knocking his knee against the table edge. He winced. "Sorry, I was starting to think you'd bail." "I was starting to think you already had." She slid onto the bench across from him, acutely aware of how small the table was, how close their knees almost touched. This was her first blind date in 3 years. Her best friend Maya had insisted, practically ambushing her after a brutal board meeting. "You can't marry your startup, Isla. You're 32, not dead." Luca flagged down a server with an efficiency that suggested he'd done this before. "So," he said, turning back to her, "do we do the whole interrogation thing? Favorite color? Biggest fear? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or do we skip the performance and pretend we're already friends?" Isla felt her shoulders drop an inch. Option 2 sounds significantly less exhausting. "Thank God," he exhaled, something genuine breaking through the professional mask. "Because I've been in back-to-back meetings since 7 a.m., and if I have to recite my resume one more time, I might actually lose it." She understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. The constant performance, the elevator pitch version of yourself, the exhaustion of being on all the time. The server appeared, a woman with a sleeve of tattoos and a bored expression. "What can I get you?" "Bourbon," Luca said. "Neat. Whatever's good." "Old-fashioned," Isla added. "Extra bitters." The server nodded and disappeared, and they were left in the weird silence that follows when strangers realize they've agreed to sit across from each other and make conversation for the next hour. "So," Isla said, tracing a water ring on the table with her finger, "how bad did your friend guilt-trip you into this?" Luca's mouth twitched. "Sister, actually, and she didn't guilt-trip me so much as threaten to show up at my office with a vision board." "A vision board?" "Of my future wife and children. She made it in college as a joke. Apparently she still has it." This time Isla did laugh, sharp and surprised. "That's either deeply supportive or mildly terrifying." "Both. Definitely both." He leaned back, and in the low light, she could see the fatigue around his eyes, the tension in his jaw that suggested he carried weight he didn't talk about. "What about you? Who pushed you into this?" "Best friend. Told me I was becoming a hermit." "Are you?" "Completely." Isla smiled. "But in my defense, hermits get a lot of work done. I used to think winning meant never showing weakness." Isla watched Luca swirl the bourbon in his glass, amber liquid catching the dim light. They'd been talking for 20 minutes, and somehow they'd skipped past weather and weekend plans and landed somewhere uncomfortably honest. "2 years ago," he said, staring into his drink like it held answers, "I worked on a project for 8 months. 80-hour weeks, weekends, holidays. I missed my nephew's baptism because I had a client call. And then the whole thing collapsed in a week." "What happened?" "Leadership changed their minds, decided the market wasn't worth it." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just like that, 8 months gone. Isla felt something tighten in her chest. She knew that story, had lived versions of it. "My first company," she said quietly, "burned through funding in 18 months. We had a good product, decent traction, but our lead investor got cold feet and pulled out, took everyone else with him." "How much did you lose?" "Everything. My savings, my credit score, 3 years of my life." She picked up her glass, the bourbon warming her tongue. "And the worst part? People acted like I should have seen it coming, like I was naive for believing in it." Luca's eyes sharpened. "Let me guess. Investors told you it was a learning experience." "Constantly, as if that makes the failure hurt less." She set the glass down harder than intended. "I'm so tired of people romanticizing failure, like it's this noble teacher instead of just loss." "Exactly." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "People think it makes you humble, but really it just makes you paranoid. Every decision feels like a landmine. And everyone's waiting for you to step wrong again." The words hung between them, more truth than either had probably planned to share. Outside, rain blurred the streetlights into soft gold smears. Inside, the bar hummed with other people's laughter, other people's easier conversations. "Can I ask you something?" Luca said. "Depends on the question. Why'd you say yes to tonight?" Isla hesitated. The real answer was messy. "Because my co-founder cornered me after I worked through another weekend. Because I'm tired of every conversation being about burn rate and user acquisition. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to talk to someone who didn't want anything from me except an hour of my time." "Curiosity," she said instead, offering the simpler truth. "You?" "Same." His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "Also, my sister wouldn't stop texting me. 12 messages in one day, with increasingly creative threats." "What kind of threats?" "She said she'd tell our parents I was too busy for family, which doesn't sound bad until you meet my mother." Isla laughed, and it felt good, easy and genuine in a way nothing had felt in weeks. Family pressure is its own kind of warfare. "You have siblings?" "Just me, but I have Maya, my co-founder, who's basically a sister. She can guilt-trip me into anything." "Sounds like we both have people who care too much about our personal lives." "Or just enough." Isla picked up her glass again, studying him over the rim. In the low light, with his guard down, Luca looked younger than she'd first thought. Still carrying weight, still tired, but more human, less polished. "To surviving people who love us," she said, lifting her drink. "To surviving," he echoed. They clinked glasses and something shifted. The space between them felt smaller, the noise of the bar farther away. The server returned with their second round, setting the glasses down with practiced efficiency. Isla reached for the cocktail menu at the same moment Luca did, both wanting to see what else they could try. What else could extend this night beyond its natural end? Their fingers collided over the leather-bound menu. Neither pulled back immediately. The contact was brief, almost nothing, just the warmth of his knuckles against hers, the rough texture of his skin, the electric awareness of touch where there shouldn't be any yet. Isla felt it travel up her arm, settling somewhere behind her ribs. She glanced up and Luca was already looking at her. Dark eyes, unreadable expression, the faintest tension in his jaw like he was calculating something. His hand stayed where it was for another heartbeat, then withdrew slowly. "Sorry," he said, voice lower than before. "It's fine." Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small miracle given that her pulse had kicked up for no logical reason. She focused on the menu, trying to ignore the warmth still lingering on her knuckles. This was absurd. She didn't do this. Didn't let herself get distracted by attractive strangers in dim bars. Didn't let her heart rate spike over accidental contact with someone she'd met 90 minutes ago. But when she looked up again, he was still watching her. "What?" she asked, half defensive, half curious. "Nothing. You just—" He stopped, shook his head like he'd thought better of whatever he was about to say. "You're not what I expected." "Is that good or bad?" "Good." He said it without hesitation, without the careful hedging most people used. "Definitely good." Isla felt something shift in her chest, a loosening she hadn't felt in months, maybe years. The weight she carried everywhere, the pitch meetings, the investor scrutiny, the constant pressure to prove she deserved to be in rooms that didn't want her, it lifted just slightly. Outside, rain drummed against the window in steady rhythm. Inside, the bar felt smaller, warmer, like the rest of the city had been swallowed by weather, and all that existed was this booth, this conversation, this man who looked at her like she was more than a founder or a strategist or a woman trying to hold together something fragile. "For the record," she said, surprising herself with the honesty, "you're not what I expected either." "Yeah?" "Yeah. I thought blind dates were supposed to be painfully awkward. Like, tell me about your hobbies, awkward." Luca's smile reached his eyes this time, softening the sharp angles of his face. "Give it time. I'm sure I'll say something horrifying eventually. Looking forward to it." That's a dangerous thing to admit. "I like danger." The words came out flirtier than she'd intended, and she saw his pupils dilate slightly, saw the way his fingers tightened around his glass. "Do you?" Isla leaned back, putting deliberate space between them before the air got too charged. "Within reason. I'm not jumping out of planes or anything." "Same. My idea of risk is trying a restaurant without reading reviews first." "Absolutely reckless." They laughed and the moment stretched into something comfortable again. But underneath, Isla felt the hum of possibility, the awareness of him in a way that had nothing to do with conversation and everything to do with chemistry. She was in so much trouble. "Okay, ground rule," Isla said, setting her glass down with a soft clink that cut through the bar's ambient noise. Luca raised an eyebrow, and she caught the flicker of amusement in his expression. "We're establishing ground rules now? Should I be taking notes?" "Just one." She leaned forward, elbows on the table, closing the space between them deliberately. "No work talk. No companies. No job titles. No, what do you do for a living?" He studied her for a long moment, and Isla wondered if she'd overstepped. Maybe he was the kind of person who defined himself by his career, who needed that structure to feel comfortable. Maybe she just made this weird, but then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "Deal." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He paused, then added, "But only if you tell me why." Isla traced the rim of her glass, choosing her words carefully. This was the kind of honesty that usually came 3 dates in, not 3 hours, but something about tonight felt outside normal rules. "Because I spend every day being that person," she said finally. "The founder, the strategist, the one who has to have all the answers and make all the right calls. And tonight," she stopped, surprised by how much she meant what she was about to say. "Tonight, I don't want to be her." "You want to be someone else?" "I want to be just me, not the resume version, not the LinkedIn profile, just Isla." The person who sometimes burns toast and watches terrible reality TV and doesn't have her life perfectly figured out. Luca's expression softened in a way that made her chest ache. I get that. Do you? More than you know. He hesitated, fingers tightening around his glass. I have a meeting tomorrow. Biggest deal I've worked on in years. Career defining, my boss keeps saying. And if I think about it too much, I'll spiral. I'll run every scenario, second guess every decision, and by morning I'll have convinced myself I'm going to fail. Isla felt a pang of recognition so sharp it almost hurt. She had a meeting tomorrow too, the kind that could save her company or bury it, the kind where one wrong word could cost her everything she'd built. But she didn't say that, couldn't say that without breaking the rules she'd just established. So tonight, Luca continued, I want to be the version of me who isn't carrying all of that, who can sit in a bar with someone interesting and just exist. Someone interesting? Isla felt herself smile despite the weight of his words. Devastatingly so. It's very inconvenient. Why inconvenient? Because I was planning to have a mediocre time, go home early, and tell my sister I tried. His mouth curved into something self-deprecating. Instead, I'm actually enjoying myself. The horror. Truly, he lifted his glass, amber liquid catching the light, to forgetting who we're supposed to be. Isla raised hers to meet his. To just being. The glasses clinked, crystal against crystal, and the pact settled between them like a shared secret. No last names, no company details, no job titles or career trajectories, or carefully curated professional personas. Just two people in a bar on a rainy night, pretending the rest of the world didn't exist. Isla knew it was temporary, knew that tomorrow morning she'd be back in her armor, fighting battles that wouldn't pause for anyone. But for now, for these few hours, she let herself forget, and it felt like breathing for the first time in months. The check arrived in a small leather folder, appearing on their table like an unwelcome guest. Isla stared at it, genuinely surprised when she glanced at her watch. 11:47 p.m. They'd been talking for over 2 hours, and it had felt like 20 minutes. How was that possible? Time didn't collapse like that, except apparently it did, when you were sitting across from someone who understood things you didn't have to explain. Her phone buzzed against the table, a calendar reminder lighting up the screen. Pitch prep, 7 a.m. Do not be late. Reality crashed back in with all its weight. I should go, she said, and hated every word. Luca nodded, but he didn't move to stand, didn't reach for his wallet. Just sat there, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Yeah, me too. Neither of them moved. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, turning the world soft and blurred through the window. The bar had emptied while they weren't paying attention. Just a few stragglers left, the bartender wiping down glasses with methodical efficiency. A single cab idled by the curb, exhaust rising into the damp air. This was, Isla started, then stopped. What was it? Good felt insufficient. Unexpected felt obvious. Important felt like too much to admit to someone she just met. Yeah, Luca said, and somehow that one word captured everything she couldn't articulate. It was. He stood first, pulling out his wallet and leaving cash on the table without looking at the bill. Isla rose too, shrugging on her coat that was still damp at the shoulders, feeling the chill seep back into her bones. They walked to the door together, not quite touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him beside her. The night air hit her face, cool and clean, smelling like rain and asphalt. She wanted to ask for his number. The words were right there, simple and obvious. Can I see you again? 3 years ago, before the startup consumed her life, she would have asked without hesitation. But now something stopped her. The exhaustion, maybe, or the knowledge that tomorrow would demand everything from her, and she didn't have space for complications. Good luck, she said instead, the words feeling insufficient even as she spoke them. With whatever you're doing tomorrow, you too. His hands were in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the cold. With your thing. My thing, she smiled despite herself. Very specific. You made the rule. I did. And she was regretting it now, standing on this rain-slicked sidewalk, watching her breath fog in the air between them. They stood there for another beat, the moment stretching into something fragile. Isla felt the pull to stay, to suggest one more drink, to find a reason to extend this night beyond its natural ending. But her phone buzzed again, Maya probably, checking if she was still alive. I should, Isla gestured vaguely toward the cab. Yeah, of course. She turned and walked toward the waiting car, every step feeling wrong. Her hand was on the door handle when she heard him call her name. Isla. She looked back. Luca stood in the doorway of the bar, backlit by the warm glow inside, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something that would change everything. Ask her to stay. Ask for her number. Ask anything that would give her permission to break her own carefully constructed boundaries. But he just raised his hand in a small wave, and she got in the cab without looking back again. This is the moment everything changes. Luca stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, tie hanging loose around his neck, and tried to silence the voice in his head that kept running worst-case scenarios. It was 6:15 a.m. The city outside his apartment was still dark, winter pressing against the windows, but his mind had been running since he woke at 5. He'd gone over the pitch deck 3 times, rehearsed his talking points until they felt automatic, run every possible objection and counter-argument through his head, and still anxiety hummed under his skin like a live wire. Today's deal wasn't just important, it was survival. Vanguard Strategy Group had spent 6 months courting this acquisition target, a small but profitable tech company with exactly the kind of niche expertise they needed. If they landed it, if Luca could convince the founders that merger was better than independence, he'd finally prove he deserved the promotion that had been dangling just out of reach for 2 years. If they lost it, if he fumbled this, he didn't let himself finish the thought. His phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Richard, his boss. Conference room A at 8:45. Don't screw this up. No pressure. Luca exhaled slowly, forcing his shoulders down from where they'd crept up near his ears. He straightened his tie with practiced efficiency, smoothed down his shirt, grabbed his briefcase from beside the door. Everything perfectly in place, everything controlled. As he locked his apartment, he thought briefly about last night. The woman with sharp eyes and a sharper laugh. The way she'd understood things he didn't have to explain. Isla. He'd liked the shape of her name, the way she'd looked at him without the careful distance most people kept. He hadn't asked for her number. Part of him regretted it now, in the cold light of morning. But maybe it was better this way. Clean. No distractions. No complications. Today required his full attention. Luca headed for the elevator, already mentally preparing for battle. The office was silent when Isla arrived at 6:30 a.m., the kind of quiet that made every sound feel too loud. The click of her heels on polished floor, the hum of her laptop booting up, the thunder of her own heartbeat. She set her bag down at her desk and pulled up the presentation for what felt like the 100th time. Every slide was perfect. Every number triple-checked. Every word chosen with surgical precision. And still her hands shook as she scrolled through. The coffee maker gurgled in the small kitchen, and moments later Maya appeared in the doorway with 2 mugs, dark circles under her eyes that matched Isla's. You're here early, Maya said, crossing the room and handing over the coffee like a peace offering. Couldn't sleep. Isla wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. You? Same. Maya sank into the chair across from her, pulling her legs up beneath her. They'd been friends since college, business partners for 4 years, and Maya knew her well enough to read the anxiety Isla was trying to hide. You ready for this? No. The honesty came easier with Maya. No performance required. But I don't think I'll ever be. They were meeting with Vanguard Strategy Group at 9. The firm had approached them 6 weeks ago. A surprising email that had felt too good to be true. Interest in partnership, potential acquisition, resources in reach, and the kind of legitimacy that could transform everything they'd built. Or destroy it, depending on how the conversation went. Isla's company was small, scrappy, profitable, but not scalable without significant capital. They'd been bootstrapping for 3 years, saying no to investors who wanted too much equity, building slowly and carefully. But they'd plateaued 6 months ago, and both she and Maya knew what that meant in their industry. Plateau meant stagnation. Stagnation meant death. What if they lowball us? Maya asked quietly, voicing the fear they'd both been dancing around. Then we walk. Isla tried to sound confident, like she believed it. And if they don't want us at all, what if this whole thing is just exploratory? Isla didn't answer. They both knew what happened if this deal fell through. They'd survive another quarter, maybe 2. But without growth, without backing, without something to change their trajectory, they'd slowly bleed out. And Isla would have to face the fact that she'd failed again. "We'll be fine," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "We have a good product, strong metrics, and we're not desperate." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Aren't we, though?" "Not visibly." Isla managed a tight smile. "That's the important part." "Right. Fake it till we make it." "Exactly." Maya stood, coffee in hand, and squeezed Isla's shoulder as she passed. "For what it's worth, I'm glad I'm doing this with you. If we're going down, at least we're going down together." "We're not going down. But if we do." "We won't." Maya nodded, but neither of them believed it. Not really. Not when everything they'd built, everything they'd sacrificed, was about to be decided in a single meeting by people who didn't know them and didn't care about their story. Isla turned back to her laptop, pulling up the presentation one more time. She had 2.5 hours to convince herself she could do this. The conference room was all glass and steel, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city skyline like a dare. 37 floors up, the world looked small and manageable from here. Isla knew it was an illusion. She sat at the far end of the polished table, Maya beside her, their pitch deck loaded on the screen and ready. Across from them, 2 analysts from Vanguard shuffled papers with practiced efficiency, faces professionally blank. The kind of people who'd sat through 100 pitches and would sit through 100 more. "They're running late," Maya murmured, checking her watch for the 3rd time. "It's a power play." Isla kept her voice low and even. She'd been in enough negotiations to recognize the tactic. Make them wait, make them sweat, establish who holds the cards before a word is spoken. The minutes ticked past. 9:03, 9:05, 9:08. Isla's phone buzzed in her pocket, probably her mother calling to wish her luck. She ignored it. Outside the windows, the city sprawled in every direction, glass towers catching morning light, bridges spanning dark water. From up here, everything looked ordered, manageable. The door handle clicked. Isla straightened in her chair, assembling her professional mask. Confident but not arrogant, open but not desperate. The performance she'd perfected over years of pitching to rooms that didn't want to listen. A man stepped in first, older, gray suit, silver hair impeccably styled. The kind of executive who commanded rooms without speaking, who made decisions worth millions before breakfast. Richard Vance. She'd researched him extensively. Managing director, 15 years at Vanguard, reputation for being fair but ruthless. Behind him, Isla's breath stopped. Luca. He froze in the doorway, eyes locking with hers. For a single suspended second, the world narrowed to just the 2 of them. His shock mirroring hers, the impossible coincidence crashing down between them like breaking glass. Last night's warmth, the conversation that had felt like breathing, the man who'd understood her without needing explanations. And now he was here, in her conference room, on the opposite side of the negotiation that would determine her company's fate. Then his face changed, shifted. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by something smooth and unreadable. Professional distance settling over his features like a mask. "Apologies for the delay," Richard said, moving to the head of the table with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in a room. "Traffic was worse than expected. I'm Richard Vance, Managing Director. This is Luca Reed, our Strategy Director. He'll be leading today's discussion." Luca's gaze slid past Isla like she was a stranger, like last night had never happened, like they hadn't sat in a dim bar for 2 hours and shared things they didn't share with anyone else. "Ms. Moreno." He nodded once, professionally. His voice was different, cooler, more clipped. The voice of someone who made decisions, not confessions. "Ms. Chen, thank you for meeting with us." Isla forced herself to nod back, forced words past the tightness in her throat. "Thank you for the opportunity." Under the table, Maya's hand found hers and squeezed once. A silent question. "Are you okay?" Isla squeezed back. "I will be." But as Luca took his seat across from her, opening his laptop with mechanical efficiency, she wondered if that was true. Last night vanished like smoke. The projector hummed in the silence, a mechanical sound that seemed too loud in Isla's ears. She stared at the screen where her opening slide glowed. Company logo, tagline, the carefully crafted introduction she'd rehearsed until it felt like breathing. But now, standing at the front of this glass-walled conference room, with the city sprawling below and 4 pairs of eyes watching her, the words wouldn't come. Her throat had closed around them, trapping everything behind the shock still reverberating through her system like aftershocks from an earthquake. Luca sat 3 feet away, laptop open, pen poised over a legal pad with the same precision he'd probably used to tie his tie this morning. Professional, detached, face arranged in an expression of polite interest that revealed absolutely nothing. Like they were strangers meeting for the first time instead of 2 people who'd shared bourbon and confessions and accidental touches 12 hours ago. She could still feel the warmth of his hand on hers, could still hear his voice dropping low as he'd told her about his own failures, his own fears, could still see the way he'd looked at her when he'd said she was interesting, like he'd meant it, like it mattered. And now he was looking at her like she was a quarterly report. "Whenever you're ready, Ms. Moreno," Richard said from the head of the table, voice neutral but pointed. A reminder that time was money, that they were busy people doing her a favor by being here at all. Maya's foot pressed against hers under the table. Hard. A physical reminder. Breathe. Focus. We need this. You can fall apart later, but not now. Not here. Not in front of them. Isla cleared her throat, the sound too loud in the quiet room, and forced herself into the persona she'd built over years of pitching to rooms that didn't want to listen. Confident, competent, unshakable. Someone who belonged here even when she felt like an imposter. "Thank you for taking this meeting," she said, and was grateful when her voice came out smooth, practiced, revealing nothing of the chaos beneath. "We're excited to share what we've built and explore how Vanguard's resources could accelerate our growth trajectory." Professional, neutral, the language of business that meant everything and nothing. She clicked to the next slide, market analysis, growth metrics, the story of their success told in clean graphs and bullet points that made 3 years of sleepless nights and near failures look inevitable. Linear, like they'd always known this was where they'd end up. Luca took notes. His handwriting was precise, controlled, slanting slightly to the right. He didn't look up, didn't meet her eyes, just wrote and listened and gave nothing away. One of the analysts, younger, hungry-looking, leaned forward. "Your user retention is impressive. 83% over 6 months. That's well above industry standard." "We prioritize user experience over rapid scaling," Isla replied, slipping into the familiar rhythm of pitch mode. This she could do. This she'd practiced. Our philosophy is that loyal users generate more sustainable revenue than churn and replace models. We'd rather grow slowly with engaged customers than quickly with ones who leave after 3 months. Sustainable, Richard repeated, and the word hung in the air with unspoken skepticism. But not scalable, at least not at your current pace. You've plateaued at your current funding level. It wasn't a question, it was an observation, an accusation dressed up in neutral language. Which is why we're here, Maya jumped in, her voice steady, even though Isla could see her hands trembling slightly on the table. We've proven product market fit. We've built something that works, something people want. What we need now is capital and infrastructure to reach the next tier, to scale without losing what makes us special. Luca's pen stopped moving. He looked up and for a fraction of a second, so brief Isla almost thought she'd imagined it, his eyes met hers. She saw something flicker there, recognition maybe, or regret, or the ghost of the man who'd sat across from her in a dim bar and told her he understood paranoia, understood the weight of building something fragile. Then it disappeared behind professional neutrality, and he was a stranger again. Walk us through your revenue model, he said, voice carefully flat. Businesslike, as if they'd never met before. And Isla realized with sinking certainty that this was going to be the longest meeting of her life. Your customer acquisition cost is concerning. Luca's voice was clinical, dissecting their business like he was reading a weather report. No warmth, no recognition of the hours of work behind every number, the sacrifices embedded in every metric. Isla kept her face neutral, even as anger simmered beneath. Our CAC is higher than average because we focus on quality over quantity. Each user we acquire has a lifetime value that justifies the initial investment. In theory, Luca tapped his pen against the legal pad, but your data only covers 18 months. That's not enough to prove long-term retention patterns. It's enough to show a trend. Trends can reverse. They can also accelerate. The words came out sharper than she intended, and across the table, Maya shot her a warning glance. Isla forced herself to breathe, to remember that this was a negotiation, not a debate, that getting defensive would only prove their point about her inexperience. But it was hard. So hard, because the man sitting across from her, the one picking apart her company with surgical precision, was the same man who'd told her about his own failures last night, who'd understood the paranoia that came with building something fragile, who'd made her feel less alone. And now he was acting like none of that had happened. Let's look at your cost structure, Richard said, clicking to the next slide without asking permission. A slide that showed exactly how thin their margins were, how vulnerable they'd be without additional funding. Isla's stomach tightened. They'd known this would come up, had prepared answers. But seeing it displayed on screen, dissected by strangers, made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with business. Your burn rate is manageable now, one of the analysts observed, but scaling would require significant capital, more than you currently have access to. That's correct, Isla said evenly, which is why partnership makes sense. We bring proven product and market knowledge. You bring resources in reach. It's complementary. Or, Lucas said quietly, you're in a position where you need us more than we need you. The words landed like a slap. Maya's hand found Isla's under the table again, squeezing tight. A reminder not to react, not to show weakness, not to let them see how close that observation had hit. I think partnership implies mutual benefit, Isla said, voice carefully controlled. If you don't see value in what we've built, we're happy to explore other options. It was a bluff. They both knew it. There were no other options, not real ones. Luca's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, and for a moment Isla thought she saw something crack in his professional facade. But then Richard cleared his throat, drawing attention back to himself. Let's take a 15-minute break, he said, standing. Give everyone a chance to reset. We're losing. Isla stood in the bathroom, hands braced against the marble counter, and tried to calm her racing heart. Through the door, she could hear the muffled sounds of the office, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the normal rhythm of business that felt impossibly distant from the disaster unfolding in the conference room. Maya burst through the door, eyes wild. "What the hell is happening in there? They're lowballing us." Isla turned on the faucet, let cold water run over her wrists, an old trick to slow her pulse. It wasn't working. "Did you see their faces when we showed margins? They know we're desperate." "Are you okay? You seem—" Maya hesitated. "You seem off, more than usual pre-meeting nerves." Isla wanted to laugh. Off. That was one way to describe the surreal nightmare of negotiating with a man she'd been flirting with 12 hours ago. A man who now looked at her like she was a balance sheet instead of a person. "I'm fine." "You're not fine." You nearly snapped at their strategy director. He was being condescending. He was doing his job. Maya studied her in the mirror, concern sharpening her features. "Isla, what's going on?" "I met him last night. We had a blind date. I told him things I don't tell anyone. And now he's sitting across from me, picking apart my company, pretending we're strangers." But she couldn't say any of that. Not now. Not when Maya needed her to be strong. "Nothing," Isla said, drying her hands with mechanical efficiency. "I'm just tired." "We're in trouble, aren't we?" Isla met her friend's eyes in the mirror. They'd been through so much together, the late nights, the near failures, the small victories that had kept them going. Maya deserved honesty. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I think we are." "What do we do?" "We go back in there, we make the best case we can, and we hope it's enough." But as they walked back to the conference room, Isla wasn't sure hope was going to cut it. Isla jabbed the elevator button harder than necessary, exhaustion and frustration making her movements sharp and graceless. The meeting had dragged on for 3 more hours after the break. More questions, more scrutiny, more of Luca's carefully neutral observations that felt like paper cuts. Death by 1,000 professional inquiries. By the time Richard had finally called it, suggesting they reconvene tomorrow after reviewing the data, Isla had felt scraped raw. She just wanted to go home, wanted to collapse in her apartment and maybe cry, or maybe just stare at the ceiling until morning came, and she had to do this all over again. The elevator dinged. Doors slid open with mechanical efficiency, and Luca stepped out. They collided, quite literally, his shoulder catching hers because neither had been paying attention. He grabbed her elbow to steady them both. An automatic gesture, and the contact sent electricity up her arm. Unwelcome, undeniable. A reminder that her body didn't care about professional boundaries or betrayal. "Sorry," he said automatically, then stopped. His hand was still on her elbow, warm through the thin fabric of her blouse. Recognition flooded his face, the professional mask cracking like ice under pressure. "Isla!" She jerked her arm away, the movement more violent than she'd intended. "It's Ms. Moreno in your conference room, remember? Or have we dropped that pretense now that the performance is over?" The elevator doors started to close. Luca's hands shot out, holding them open, and before Isla could protest, he'd stepped into the elevator with her. The doors closed behind him with a soft whoosh, trapping them in the small space that suddenly felt impossibly smaller. "What are you doing?" Isla demanded, pressing herself against the far wall. The mirrored panels reflected them back at themselves, her wild-eyed and defensive, him disheveled in a way he hadn't been in the conference room, tie loosened and hair falling across his forehead. "I didn't know." The words came out rushed, desperate, nothing like his measured conference room voice. "Last night I had no idea you were— I didn't know you were the founder we were meeting with. I swear to God, Isla, I had no idea." "And that makes this better?" She heard her voice rising and couldn't stop it. "That makes it okay that you spent 3 hours systematically dismantling everything I built?" "No, God, no." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying what was left of the careful styling. But I need you to know I wasn't playing you. I wasn't gathering intelligence or setting you up or... Weren't you, though? The accusation tasted bitter on her tongue. All those questions about my work, my failures, my fears, that must have been incredibly useful for today's interrogation. Really helped you find the pressure points. I didn't ask about your work. You made a rule, remember? No companies, no job titles. I followed that rule. How convenient that you followed it when I didn't know who you were, when I couldn't protect myself. Luca flinched like she'd physically hit him, and some small, mean part of her was glad. She wanted him to hurt the way she was hurting, wanted him to feel a fraction of the betrayal that had been sitting like lead in her stomach all day. "That's not fair," he said quietly. "Fair?" She laughed, and it came out sharp and bitter. Nothing like the laugh they'd shared last night over bourbon and bad blind date stories. "You picked apart my company for 3 hours. You questioned every decision, every metric, every choice I've made. You made me feel small and incompetent and desperate. You made me feel exactly the way I was terrified of feeling. So forgive me if I'm not particularly concerned about being fair to you right now." The elevator continued its descent, floor numbers ticking down with mechanical indifference. 28, 27, 26. The city getting closer with every second. The outside world waiting to swallow them back into their separate lives. "I was doing my job," Luca said, and there was something broken in his voice that she didn't want to acknowledge. "So was I. Last night was my job too. Pretending, performing, being the version of myself that makes people comfortable enough to let their guard down." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, acrid and wrong, but she needed armor right now. Needed him to believe that last night meant nothing, so she could believe it too. "You don't believe that?" It wasn't a question. "I don't know what I believe anymore." Isla stared at the descending numbers, refusing to look at him, refusing to see if his expression matched the hurt in his voice. "All I know is that my company's survival depends on impressing people who've already decided we're not worth their time. People like you." "That's not..." He stopped, jaw working like he was physically holding back words. "It's more complicated than that." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty simple." The elevator reached the lobby, and Isla positioned herself to bolt the moment the doors opened. "You have the power, we have the need, and you're going to use that imbalance to get the best deal possible, regardless of what it costs us. That's how this works. That's how it's always worked." The doors opened to the busy lobby, people rushing past with coffee cups and briefcases and conversations about things that mattered to them. Normal life, continuing without awareness of the small tragedy playing out in an elevator. Isla stepped out without looking back. "Isla!" Luca called after her, and she heard everything in that single word: regret and frustration, and something that might have been longing. She kept walking. "Sorry," he said automatically, then stopped. Recognition flooded his face, the professional mask cracking. "Isla!" She jerked her arm away. "It's Ms. Moreno in your conference room, remember?" The elevator doors started to close. Lupa's hands shot out, holding them open. "Wait, please. I have nothing to say to you." "I have things to say to you." He glanced down the hallway, empty thankfully, then stepped into the elevator with her. The doors closed, trapping them in the small space. "What are you doing?" Isla demanded, pressing herself against the far wall. "I didn't know." The words came out rushed, desperate. "Last night I had no idea you were... I didn't know you were the founder we were meeting with." "And that makes this better?" "No, God, no." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying the careful styling. "But I need you to know I wasn't playing you. I wasn't gathering intelligence or..." "Weren't you, though?" Isla's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "All those questions about my work, my failures, my fears, that must have been useful for today's interrogation." "I didn't ask about your work. You made a rule. No companies, remember? How convenient that you followed it when I didn't know who you were. Luca flinched like she'd hit him. That's not fair. Fair? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You picked apart my company for 3 hours. You questioned every decision, every metric, every choice I've made. You made me feel small and incompetent and desperate. So forgive me if I'm not concerned about being fair. The elevator continued its descent, floor numbers ticking down. 28, 27, 26. I was doing my job, Luca said quietly. So was I. Last night was my job too. Pretending, performing, being the version of myself that makes people comfortable. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she needed armor right now. Needed him to believe that last night meant nothing. You don't believe that? I don't know what I believe anymore. Isla stared at the closing numbers, refusing to look at him. All I know is that my company's survival depends on impressing people who've already decided we're not worth their time. That's not... He stopped, jaw working. It's more complicated than that. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty simple. You have the power, we have the need, and you're going to use that to get the best deal possible, regardless of what it costs us. The elevator reached the ground floor. Doors opened to the busy lobby, and Isla stepped out without looking back. Isla, Luca called after her. She kept walking. Luca's office was quiet except for the hum of his computer and the distant sound of traffic 37 floors below. He stared at the document on his screen, the preliminary terms they'd be sending to Isla's company tomorrow. Numbers and clauses that told a story of acquisition, not partnership, of absorption, not collaboration. Richard wanted them to lowball. They're desperate, he'd said after the meeting. Small company, limited runway, no other serious offers. We can get them for a fraction of what they're asking. Luca had nodded, had agreed, had spent the last 2 hours drafting terms that would give Vanguard everything and leave Isla with barely anything. Because that was his job. That was what he was good at, finding the pressure points, exploiting the weaknesses, structuring deals that favored his side. He'd done it dozens of times before without losing sleep. But this felt different. He thought about the woman in the bar, the one who'd told him about failure and paranoia and the weight of carrying something fragile, the one who'd made him feel less alone for the first time in months. And then he thought about the woman in the conference room, chin lifted in defiance, even as they'd systematically dismantled every argument she'd made. Pride and terror warring in her eyes. They were the same person, and he was about to crush what she'd built. His phone buzzed, a text from Richard. Draft ready? Need it first thing tomorrow. Luca looked at the document again, at the equity split that would leave Isla and Maya with minimal control, at the earn-out structure that might pay them fairly if everything went perfectly, which it never did, at the non-compete clause that would trap them if they wanted to leave. These terms would save his career, prove he could close difficult deals, secure his promotion, and destroy Isla in the process. He saved the document, sent it to Richard, and felt something hollow open in his chest. Isla's phone lit up at 9:47 p.m. with an email notification that made her blood run cold. Preliminary terms, Vanguard Partnership Proposal. She opened the attachment with shaking hands, Maya leaning over her shoulder in the empty office they'd refused to leave. They'd stayed late, running numbers on the whiteboard, trying to figure out their negotiating position for tomorrow's follow-up meeting, trying to find leverage where none existed. The terms made that negotiating position devastatingly, brutally clear. They had none. This is... Maya's voice cracked halfway through the sentence. This isn't a partnership. This is a hostile takeover dressed up in partnership language. Isla scanned the document, each clause worse than the last. 15% equity retention, which meant they'd own less of their own company than a junior employee at a startup. Earn-out payments contingent on metrics so aggressive they'd be impossible to hit. revenue targets that would require tripling their current growth rate, non-compete clauses stretching 5 years that would prevent them from starting anything new if they left, effectively trapping them or forcing them out of the industry entirely. They want to own us, Isla said flatly, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. Not partner with us, not support us, own us. Strip out everything we built and repurpose it for their portfolio. Can we counter? Can we negotiate? With what leverage? Isla set her phone down on the desk before she threw it against the wall. We walked into that room with nothing, and they knew it. God, they knew it the whole time. Every question, every objection, every concern they raised, they were just confirming what they already suspected. So what do we do? Isla thought about Luca's face in the elevator. The way he'd insisted he hadn't known who she was last night, hadn't been playing her. The desperation in his voice when he'd said it wasn't supposed to be like this. But he'd known by the time he drafted these terms, known exactly how desperate they were, exactly how little power they had, exactly which pressure points would make them fold. And he'd used all of it. I need to talk to him, Isla said, already reaching for her coat hanging on the back of her chair. Now? Isla, it's almost 10 at night. Now. She was already moving toward the door, adrenaline and anger and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak propelling her forward. She made it to Vanguard's office building in 20 minutes, half running through rain-slicked streets that reflected the city lights in smears of gold and red. The security guard in the lobby gave her a skeptical look, soaking wet from the rain, wild-eyed, demanding access at 10 p.m. to a floor that should be empty. But her name was apparently still in the system from this morning's meeting. Conference floors close at 7, he said, hand hovering over the phone like he was deciding whether to call the police. I know someone's still up there, 37th floor, the lights on in the corner office. She pointed at the building directory behind him, where a small screen showed which floors had active keycard access. Please, it's important. Something in her voice must have convinced him, because he nodded and waved her through. 37th floor. Down the hallway she'd walked just this morning, when everything had still been terrible, but at least contained. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too bright and sterile. She could see light bleeding out from under one office door at the end of the hall. She didn't knock before pushing it open. Luca looked up from his computer, startled. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled up, hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. He looked exhausted. He looked guilty. Isla? You used me. The words came out low and furious, vibrating with barely controlled rage. Last night, you listened to me talk about my fears, my failures, how terrifying it is to need something this badly, how paranoid failure makes you, how every decision feels like a landmine. And then you weaponized every single word of it. He stood slowly, hands raised like she was a dangerous animal. I didn't. These terms, she held up her phone, the email glowing between them. This is what last night was for, wasn't it? Get me comfortable. Get me talking. Find out exactly how desperate we are so you could lowball us appropriately. That's not what happened. Then explain these terms. Explain why you're trying to take everything we built for pennies on the dollar. Luca's jaw tightened. Those terms are standard for companies in your position. Our position? You mean desperate, backed into a corner, no other options. She stepped closer, voice dropping. Did you feel good drafting this, knowing exactly how much it would hurt? Isla, I trusted you. The words cracked on the way out. I sat in that bar and let myself be honest with you because I actually thought you understood. I did understand. I do. Then how could you do this? The question hung between them, and for a moment Isla thought she saw something break in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or regret. But then he straightened, and the professional mask slid back into place. Because it's my job, he said quietly, and you'd do the same in my position. Isla stared at him, at this stranger wearing the face of someone she'd started to care about, and felt something harden in her chest. You're right, she said. I probably would, which just proves we're both exactly what we were afraid of becoming. She turned and walked out, leaving him standing in the fluorescent light of his office, and didn't look back. This is where it ends. Isla sat in the dark office at 2 a.m., the city lights below blurring through tears she refused to let fall. The email chain on her laptop told the story of their final communications, Vanguard's terms, her counter-proposal, their flat rejection. They'd called her bluff, and now she had nothing. Maya had gone home hours ago, exhausted and defeated. We'll figure something out, she'd said, but they both knew it was over. Without Vanguard, without funding, without options, they had maybe 60 days before they'd have to start making cuts. 90 before they'd have to consider shutting down entirely. 3 years of work. Gone. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Please let me explain. Isla deleted it without reading further. She knew it was Luca. Knew he was probably sitting in his own office, drafting the acquisition papers that would formalize their defeat. Another text. I tried to push for better terms. Richard overruled me. Another delete. Isla, please. Last night wasn't fake. Her fingers hovered over the delete button, but something stopped her. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe the part of her that still wanted to believe him, despite everything. She typed back, it doesn't matter if it was fake or real. The result is the same. You win. We lose. That's how this works. His reply came immediately. I don't want to win like this. Then don't. Walk away from the deal. 3 minutes passed. 5. 10. No response. Isla set her phone face down on the desk and let herself cry. Not for the company, though that hurt. Not for the lost opportunity, though that stung. But for the brief, foolish moment last night when she'd felt seen by someone who understood. When she'd let herself hope that maybe she could have both, the career she'd built and someone who got it. She should have known better. Hope was expensive, and she just learned exactly how much it cost. Maya burst into the office at 7 a.m., nearly knocking over Isla's cold coffee. You need to see this, she said, laptop already open. I couldn't sleep, so I started digging into Vanguard's history, their past acquisitions. Maya, I don't think... Just look. Isla leaned over, exhaustion making the screen blur. Maya had pulled up an article from 2 years ago about a small tech company, similar size to theirs, similar situation. They'd been in talks with Vanguard. The deal had fallen through at the last minute. Okay, Isla said slowly. So they walked away. That happens. Keep reading. The article detailed what happened next. The company had found emergency funding from another source, a smaller firm that had swooped in with better terms. They'd survived, thrived even. And the person who'd helped broker that connection, who'd apparently leaked information about Vanguard's lowball tactics to the other firm, an unnamed strategy director at Vanguard, someone who'd left shortly after to start their own consulting practice. I traced the timeline, Maya said, pulling up another document. The strategy director who left joined Vanguard 6 months before that deal, was assigned to lead the acquisition. Isla's heart started to pound. You think? I think someone at Vanguard has done this before, helped a company escape a bad deal. Maya looked up, hope and fear mixing in her expression. And I think that someone might have been Luca Reed. That doesn't make sense. He just drafted terrible terms for us. Unless he didn't have a choice. Unless Richard is watching him more closely this time. Maya pulled up one more email, this one from their initial contact with Vanguard. Look at who reached out first. Who suggested they take a meeting with us? Isla read the name at the bottom of the email signature. Luca Reed. He brought us in, Maya said quietly, before he knew it was us, before the blind date. He saw our company and thought we were worth pursuing. Isla sank into her chair, mind racing. If Maya was right, if Luca had a history of helping companies instead of crushing them, then everything looked different. The harsh terms might not be his choice. The professional distance might be necessary to protect them both. "What do I do?" she whispered. "I don't know, but I think you need to talk to him. Really talk to him. Not in an elevator, not in anger. Actually talk." Isla looked at her phone, at the deleted text from last night, at the one message she'd sent that had killed the conversation. Maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe they both had. Luca stood in Richard's office, the promotion letter heavy in his hand. "Congratulations," Richard said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Senior Strategy Director. Well deserved. You've closed more difficult deals this year than anyone else." "Thank you," Luca managed. "The Moreno acquisition seals it. Once she signs tomorrow, and she will sign, she has no other options. You'll officially be promoted. Corner office, 30% raise, full equity package. Everything Luca had worked toward for 2 years. Right there, contingent on Isla's signature on papers that would destroy what she'd built. "There's just one thing," Richard continued. "I heard you and Ms. Moreno had an encounter in the elevator yesterday, and that she showed up here last night." Luca's blood went cold. She had questions about the terms. "I'm sure she did." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm also sure you understand the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. We can't have perception of impropriety affecting the deal." "There's no impropriety." "Good. Then you won't have any contact with her outside of official meetings until the papers are signed. Agreed?" It wasn't a question. "Agreed," Luca said. He left the office with the promotion letter and felt like he'd sold something irreplaceable. Not his integrity, that had been compromised the moment he drafted those terms, but something deeper. The part of him that had sat in a bar and been honest. The part that had felt seen by someone who understood. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know what you did 2 years ago. I know you tried to help that other company. I think you're trying to help us too, but I can't tell if I'm seeing what's real or what I want to see." Isla, she'd figured it out. Luca stared at the message, Richard's warning echoing in his mind. No contact outside official meetings, no perception of impropriety, no risk to the deal or his promotion. He typed, "Can't talk, meeting only, tomorrow, 2 p.m., conference room B, come alone," and hoped she'd understand what he was really saying. "Trust me one more time." Conference room B was smaller than the main room, tucked in a corner of the 37th floor where voices didn't carry and windows faced a brick wall instead of the city. Isla arrived at exactly 2 p.m., heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Maya had wanted to come, had insisted actually, worried about Isla meeting alone with someone who'd already proven himself capable of calculated cruelty. But the text had been explicit, clear, come alone. Luca was already there, door closed, blinds drawn over the interior window that faced the hallway. He looked worse than he had last night, eyes shadowed, jaw tight with tension, still wearing yesterday's shirt like he'd slept in his office. If he'd slept at all. "Is this legal?" she asked, staying near the exit, keeping her escape route clear. "Secret meetings with the other side during active negotiations?" "Probably not." He gestured to the chair across from him, but didn't move to force the issue. "But I need you to listen, and I need you to not react visibly because there are cameras in the main hallways, and I can't afford for Richard to know I'm talking to you." Isla sat slowly, every muscle tense and ready to bolt. She'd come here hoping for answers, but the paranoid part of her brain, the part that had been screaming warning since the conference room door had opened yesterday, wondered if this was another trap, another performance. "I'm listening," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "The terms Richard sent are designed to make you walk away." Luca said it flat, matter of fact, like he was presenting data instead of destroying her last hope. He doesn't actually want to acquire your company. He wants you to reject the offer. Isla felt something cold settle in her stomach. Then why go through all this? Why waste everyone's time? Because Vanguard needs to show deal activity, keep the board happy, maintain the illusion of aggressive growth strategy. But Richard's more interested in larger acquisitions, bigger names, sexier companies. Your company is too small to matter to him, too niche to move the needle on quarterly reports. That doesn't make sense. Isla leaned forward, anger cutting through confusion. Why bring us in at all? Why reach out in the first place? Luca's expression shifted into something that looked like regret. I brought you in. Before I knew it was you. Before the blind date. I saw your company profile cross my desk 6 weeks ago. Saw your metrics, your growth trajectory, the quality of what you'd built with limited resources. And I thought you deserved better than bootstrapping forever on razor-thin margins. I thought we could offer real partnership. But Richard disagreed. Richard sees you as filler, a deal to check a box while he pursues the acquisitions he actually cares about. Big tech companies, established brands, things that look impressive in board presentations. Luca pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase, slid it across the table with careful precision. These are the terms I originally drafted, before he made me change them, before he decided your company wasn't worth actual investment. Isla opened the folder with shaking hands that she couldn't quite control. The numbers inside were completely different from last night's email. 40% equity retention instead of 15%. Earn-out structure tied to reasonable metrics instead of impossible ones. Board seats for her and Maya. Actual partnership clauses instead of absorption language. Terms she could have lived with. Terms that would have let them grow without losing everything they'd built. Why are you showing me this? Her voice came out hoarse. Because I need you to reject our official offer tomorrow, publicly and loudly. Make it clear you won't accept lowball terms, that you'd rather maintain independence than accept a deal that disrespects what you built. That's suicide for my company. Isla looked up from the folder, searching his face for any sign of manipulation. You know we don't have other options. You know we're running out of runway. Not if you have another option. Luca pulled out his phone, navigated to his email, and turned the screen toward her. I've been talking to someone, Whitmore and Associates, a smaller firm that specializes in growth equity for companies your size. They're interested, very interested. They want to meet with you. Isla read the email chain, barely breathing. Whitmore and Associates. She'd heard of them, had researched them months ago when exploring funding options. They had a reputation for fair dealing, for actually supporting founders instead of replacing them, for believing in long-term growth over quick exits. Why would they be interested in us? They're selective. They turn down 90% of companies that approach them. Because I told them you were worth it. I sent them your real metrics, not the version we sanitized for the official Vanguard presentation. I sent them your user testimonials, your retention data, your product roadmap. I told them what you're actually capable of when you have proper support. You risked your job for this. It wasn't a question. Luca's smile was bitter, self-deprecating. I've risked it before. 2 years ago, I helped another company escape a bad deal with Vanguard. Smaller company, similar situation. I thought I was subtle enough that Richard wouldn't notice. I was wrong. He knows what you did? He suspects, strongly, which is why I've had to be so careful this time, why I couldn't reach out to you directly after that night, why I've had to play the role of heartless strategist, picking apart your company like it doesn't matter to me. Isla stared at him, everything reorganizing in her mind like a puzzle, finally clicking into place. The harsh terms, the cold demeanor in meetings, the way he'd looked at her in the elevator was something like desperation. All of it was performance, not truth. Protection, not cruelty. So what happens now? She asked quietly. You reject our offer, loudly, publicly, in a way that makes it clear you're walking away on principle. Whitmore reaches out within 24 hours. I've already primed them. You take their deal instead. Better terms, real partnership, actual chance of success. And you? I probably get fired. Richard will figure out I was involved eventually, but I was planning to leave anyway. He gestured vaguely at the office around them, at the glass walls and sterile furniture and corporate machinery. Start my own consulting firm. Actually help companies instead of extracting value from them. Luca, Ila's voice cracked despite her efforts to control it. Why? Why risk everything you've built, your career, your reputation, your financial security for us? For me? He met her eyes and she saw the answer there before he spoke. Saw it in the way his expression softened, in the vulnerability he was finally letting show through the professional mask. Because last night was real, he said quietly, and I refuse to be the person who destroys something real just to protect something that was never worth having in the first place. Because last night was real, he said quietly, and I refuse to be the person who destroys something real just to protect something that was never worth having in the first place. The official rejection meeting was pure theater. Isla sat across from Richard, Maya beside her, and delivered the speech she'd rehearsed all night. Eloquent, firm, dripping with exactly the kind of proud defiance that would make Richard think she was making a mistake. Your terms are unacceptable, she said, sliding the unsigned papers back across the table. We'd rather maintain independence than accept a deal that undervalues what we've built. Richard's expression didn't change. Ms. Moreno, I understand you're disappointed, but these terms are standard. They're insulting, and we're done here. She stood, Maya following her lead, and they walked out of Vanguard's office with their heads high and their hearts racing. The elevator doors closed. Did we just commit career suicide? Maya whispered. Possibly, Isla admitted. Her phone buzzed. An email from the firm Luca had mentioned. Love the story we heard about your company. Would love to talk. Are you free tomorrow? Isla showed Maya the screen. Oh my God, Maya breathed. It's real. He actually did it. They made it to the lobby, to the street, to the corner before Isla let herself look back at the building. 37 floors of glass and steel, and somewhere up there, Luca was probably being called into Richard's office. Her phone buzzed again. A text from him. Done. Free. Terrified. Worth it. Isla typed back. Coffee tomorrow? To discuss partnership and other important topics? Are you asking me on a date, Ms. Moreno? I'm asking you on several dates, after we save both our companies. Deal. The meeting with the new firm went better than Isla had dared hope. Fair terms, real partnership, actual respect for what she and Maya had built. They signed the preliminary agreement in a conference room that smelled like fresh coffee instead of intimidation, and walked out feeling like maybe, just maybe, they'd survived. We did it, Maya said, laughing with relief. We actually did it. Isla pulled out her phone to text Luca to share the victory, but his last message stopped her. Meeting with Richard in 10. Don't worry about me. This is my choice. That had been 3 hours ago. She tried calling, straight to voicemail. Tried texting. No response. A cold feeling settled in her stomach. They made it back to the office, and Isla immediately pulled up Vanguard's website. Found Luca's profile. Still there. Still listed as strategy director. Maybe he was fine. Maybe Richard had been understanding. Maybe... Her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Miss Moreno, this is Richard Vance. I wanted to inform you that Luca Reed is no longer with Vanguard Strategy Group, effective immediately. Isla's breath caught. What did you... Nothing I didn't have cause to do. He violated several company policies, but I wanted you to know so you wouldn't try to contact him through our channels. Consider this a courtesy call. The line went dead. Isla stared at her phone, the victory from an hour ago turning to ash. Luca had lost his job, the promotion he'd worked toward for 2 years, The security and prestige and everything that came with a position at Vanguard. Because of her. Because he'd chosen to help her instead of help himself. Maya touched her shoulder gently. Isla? I need to find him, Isla said, already reaching for her coat. Where? I don't know, but I have to try. She made it to the street, to the rain that had started falling again, and pulled up their last conversation, the bar where they'd met. It was a long shot, but it was the only place she could think of that meant something to both of them. She ran, and prayed he'd be there. The rain had stopped, but Isla was still soaked. She stood outside the bar where they'd met, the same cedar and citrus smell drifting through the open door, the same dim lighting promising refuge from the chaos outside. But this time she wasn't here for a blind date. This time she was here looking for someone who'd risked everything for her and might not want to be found. Her phone buzzed. Maya. Any word from Whitmore? Isla typed back. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. We might actually survive this. What she didn't type. But I can't celebrate until I know Luca's okay. She pushed through the door. The bartender looked up, recognition flickering across his face. You were here a few nights ago, with the guy in the gray sweater. Is he here now? Corner booth. Been there about an hour. Hasn't ordered anything but bourbon. The bartender's expression softened with something like sympathy. Looks like he's having a rough night. Isla found him exactly where they'd sat before. Same booth, same shadows, but everything else was different. Luca sat with his shoulders hunched, tie completely gone now, staring at an empty glass like it held answers. He looked exhausted, defeated. Nothing like the confident strategist who'd commanded conference rooms. Hi, she said quietly and watched him startle. Isla. He straightened automatically, then seemed to remember he had nothing left to prove and slumped back. You shouldn't be here. If Richard finds out we're meeting... Richard fired you today. What's he going to do? Fire you again? She slid into the booth across from him, the same space she'd occupied 3 nights ago when the world had been simpler. Maya told me. She has a contact at Vanguard who heard the whole thing. Luca's laugh was hollow. Let me guess, he made it dramatic. He accused you of corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. Had security escort you out of the building. Isla studied his face, looking for regret or anger, but all she saw was exhaustion. I'm so sorry. This is my fault. No. The word came out sharp, almost fierce. This was my choice, my decision. Don't take that away from me. You lost everything because of me. I lost a job I hated working for a man I didn't respect. Luca picked up his glass, realized it was empty, set it down again. That's not everything. That's barely anything. Your promotion, your financial security, your reputation. My reputation is that I help companies instead of destroying them. I can live with that. He met her eyes, and she saw something raw there. What I couldn't live with was crushing what you'd built just to climb a ladder I didn't even want to be on. The bartender appeared, set down 2 fresh drinks without being asked. Isla recognized hers, old-fashioned, extra bitters. The same drink from that first night. On the house, the bartender said. You 2 look like you need it. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the last 48 hours settling between them like sediment. Whitmore wants to meet tomorrow, Isla said finally. Your plan worked. We're going to survive this. Good, Luca smiled, and it almost reached his eyes. That's good. Come with me. He blinked. What? To the meeting. Come with me. Whitmore knows you reached out on our behalf. They're impressed by what you did, and I... She stopped, tried to find words for feelings she hadn't had time to process. I don't want to do this without you. Isla, I'm the reason you almost lost everything. No, you're the reason we didn't. She reached across the table, let her hand rest near his. Not quite touching, but close enough to feel the heat. You're the reason we have a chance at all. Luca stared at her hand, and she saw him war with something. Pride, maybe, or shame, or the careful walls he'd built between personal and professional. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Their fingers intertwined, and it felt like coming home. The Whitmore and Associates office was nothing like Vanguard. Instead of glass and steel, there was exposed brick and warm wood. Instead of minimalist furniture, there were bookshelves crammed with industry journals and plants that actually looked alive. Instead of the intimidating 37th floor, they were in a converted warehouse in a neighborhood Isla actually recognized. "This feels right," Maya whispered as they waited in the lobby. "Like they actually care about companies instead of quarterly reports." Luca sat beside Isla, dressed in a suit but somehow looking less corporate than he had at Vanguard. More human. He'd been quiet on the drive over, and she wondered if he was regretting coming, regretting the choice that had cost him everything. "You okay?" she asked softly. Nervous, he managed a small smile. "I've never been on this side of a pitch before. It's terrifying." "Welcome to my world. Your world is braver than mine." Before Isla could respond, a woman appeared, early 50s, gray hair in a neat bun, expression warm but assessing. "Ms. Moreno? Ms. Chen? I'm Claire Whitmore. Please, come in." They followed her into a conference room that felt more like a living room. Comfortable chairs, good lighting, coffee already waiting. Claire gestured for them to sit, then turned to Luca with an appraising look. "Mr. Reed, I wasn't expecting you to join us, but I'm glad you did. What you did for this company took courage." "It also got me fired," Luca said, and Isla heard the careful neutrality in his voice. Professional mask, even here. "Yes, I heard about that." Claire poured coffee, handed it around. "Richard Vance called me yesterday, warned me that you were unethical, that I shouldn't trust anything you'd told me about this company." Isla's stomach dropped. "If Whitmore believed Richard, which told me everything I needed to know," Claire continued, settling into her chair. "Richard only gets defensive when someone outmaneuvers him. And from what I can tell, you did exactly that." "I just connected two parties that could benefit each other," Luca said carefully. "You protected a good company from being exploited. You risked your career for principle." Claire smiled, and it was genuine. "That's the kind of person I want working with the companies we invest in." Isla felt Luca go still beside her. "I'm not sure I understand." "I'm offering you a position, advisory role. You help us evaluate potential investments, work with our portfolio companies, use that strategic mind of yours to build things instead of taking them apart." Claire looked at all three of them. "If you're interested, and if Ms. Moreno and Ms. Chen are comfortable with it." Isla's mind raced. Luca working with Whitmore meant he'd be working with her company. Closely. Regularly. It blurred every professional boundary they'd been trying to maintain. But it also meant he wouldn't have lost everything. Meant he'd have a future that aligned with his values. "I'd be comfortable with it," Isla said before she could second-guess herself. "Very comfortable." Maya nodded. "Same." Luca looked at Isla, something vulnerable in his expression. "Are you sure? After everything that's happened?" "I'm sure." And she was. Whatever complications came with working together, they'd figure it out. They'd already survived worse. "Then yes," Luca said, turning back to Claire. "I'm interested." "Excellent." Claire pulled out a folder. "Now let's talk about your company's growth trajectory and what real partnership looks like." This is what fair looks like. Isla stared at the term sheet Claire had presented and felt something unclench in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. 45% equity retention. Board seats for both her and Maya. Earn-out structure tied to metrics they'd actually helped design, based on sustainable growth instead of impossible scaling. Capital infusion that would fund 18 months of runway instead of draining their reserves. Support infrastructure, HR, legal, marketing, without forced restructuring. "This is generous," Maya said quietly, and Isla heard the disbelief underneath. They've been bracing for another fight, Another negotiation where they had to defend their worth. It's fair, Claire corrected. You've built something valuable. We want to help it grow, not strip it for parts. She looked at Luca. Your analysis was thorough. The metrics you sent showed us exactly what this company is capable of with proper support. I just presented what was already there, Luca said, but Isla saw the way his shoulders had relaxed. Pride, maybe, or relief that he'd been right about them. They spent the next 2 hours going through details, timelines, milestones, reporting structures. Every question Isla and Maya raised was met with thoughtful answers instead of dismissal. Every concern was addressed instead of waved away. It felt surreal, like they'd stumbled into an alternate universe where investors actually cared about founders. I think we have a deal, Claire said finally, extending her hand. Welcome to the Whitmore family. Isla shook and felt the weight of 3 years of uncertainty finally lift. They signed preliminary agreements, exchanged contact information, made plans for next steps. As they gathered their things to leave, Claire pulled Isla aside. He cares about you, she said quietly, nodding toward Luca, who was discussing technical details with Maya by the door. That's obvious, but I need you to know, my offer to him is genuine, not contingent on your relationship, whatever that is. He's talented enough to earn his place here. I know, Isla said, and meant it. Good. Just wanted to make sure we're all clear on boundaries. They stepped out into afternoon sunlight, the city looking different than it had this morning. Brighter, full of possibility instead of threat. We did it, Maya said, laughing with disbelief and relief. We actually did it. You did it, Luca corrected. You built something worth investing in. I just helped connect the dots. You did more than that. Isla turned to face him on the sidewalk, aware of Maya tactfully moving a few steps away to check her phone. You risked everything. And gained something better. He smiled, tentative but real. A job I might actually enjoy. Working with people I respect, and… He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. And? Isla prompted. And a chance. With you. If you want that. If it's not too complicated with work. It's definitely too complicated, Isla interrupted. We'll have to figure out professional boundaries. Manage conflicts of interest. Probably drive Claire insane with ethics questions. So that's a no? That's a yes. She closed the distance between them, hyper-aware of the fact that they were standing on a public sidewalk in the middle of the afternoon. It's a yes to complicated, to figuring it out, to trying. Luca's smile transformed his face, exhaustion giving way to something that looked like hope. I can work with that. Good, because I'm terrible at simple anyway. He laughed, and it was the sound from the bar that first night, genuine, unguarded, the version of himself he'd let her see before everything got messy. Maya cleared her throat. I hate to interrupt this moment, but should we celebrate? There's a wine bar around the corner that does an excellent happy hour. Rain check, Isla said, not taking her eyes off Luca. I think we have some things to discuss, about boundaries and ethics and how to navigate working together. Sure, Maya said, grinning. That's definitely what you're going to discuss. She left them standing on the sidewalk, and Isla felt Luca's hand find hers. Tentative, questioning. She squeezed back. An answer. Luca's apartment was smaller than Isla had imagined, a studio in a building that had seen better decades, with a view of another building's brick wall instead of the city skyline. Not what you expected? He asked, catching her expression as he unlocked the door. I pictured something more corporate, glass and chrome. That was the plan. Save for a year, get the promotion, upgrade to the nice neighborhood. He shoved the door open with his shoulder, the lock stuck, clearly a familiar problem. But that particular plan ended yesterday. The apartment was neat but sparse. A bed in one corner, small kitchen in another, desk covered in papers near the window. Moving boxes still stacked against one wall, like he'd never fully unpacked, despite living here for How long? A reminder that he'd been working too hard to build a life. How bad is it? Isla asked, gesturing vaguely at everything. Financially, now that Vanguard fired you. Lucas set his keys down, loosened his tie. I have savings, not a lot, but enough for a few months while I figure things out. The Whitmore position won't start for another month. They need to clear it through their partnership board. So you're unemployed with rent to pay and bills piling up? Technically, yes. He smiled, but it didn't hide the worry underneath. But I'll manage. I've been through worse. Isla thought about the story he'd told that first night, the project that had collapsed, the months of work lost in a week. He'd survived that. He'd survived this. But he shouldn't have to do it alone. Come work with me, she said. Luca blinked. What? For the next month, consulting. We need strategic planning for the Whitmore partnership anyway. Timeline development, integration planning, growth projections. You know how to do all of that. She leaned against his kitchen counter, the argument forming as she spoke. It's legitimate work, not charity. We'll pay you consulting rates. Isla, I'm serious. You helped save my company. Let me return the favor. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him warring with pride and practicality. That's not why I did it. I know, but it's what I'm offering anyway. What will Maya think? What will Whitmore think? Maya will think it's smart to hire experienced talent. Whitmore will think we're being strategic. Isla stepped closer. And if anyone asks, we'll be completely honest. You're someone I trust who happens to know our company better than most external consultants would. Someone you trust. Luca's mouth curved. Is that what we're calling this? What would you call it? Complicated, messy, probably inadvisable from an HR perspective. All true. She closed the remaining distance, but also real. His hands found her waist, careful and tentative. I don't want you to feel obligated. I don't do obligation. I do smart business decisions. Her arms looped around his neck. Hiring you is smart business. Everything else is just complicated and messy? Exactly. He kissed her, and it felt like the first honest thing they'd done since walking into that conference room 2 days ago. No performance, no professional masks, just two people who'd survived something difficult together and decided they wanted to try for something more. When they broke apart, Luca was smiling. Okay. Okay to the consulting work? Okay to all of it. The work, the mess, the complications. Good. Isla pulled back, already thinking through logistics. Because we need to set boundaries, professional and personal. Clear lines so we don't make Claire regret hiring either of us. Now? You want to have the boundaries conversation now? Better now than after things get messier. Luca laughed, pulling her back. You're very practical for someone who's supposed to be having a romantic moment. Romance and practicality aren't mutually exclusive. No, he agreed, kissing her again. They're just complicated. I'm starting to like complicated. Good, because I think we're stuck with it. 2 weeks later, they went on their first official date. Not a blind date arranged by well-meaning friends. Not a secret meeting in an empty conference room. Not a celebration drink that was really about business. An actual, intentional date where they both showed up knowing exactly who the other person was. Luca picked her up at 7, and Isla opened the door to find him holding flowers. Simple daisies, nothing extravagant, and looking more nervous than he had facing Richard's accusations. Hi, he said. Hi. She took the flowers, let him see her smile. You clean up nice. You've seen me in a suit every day for 2 weeks. This is different. This is date suit, not work suit. There's a difference? Absolutely. Date suit comes with flowers. They drove to a restaurant neither of them had been to. Neutral territory, no memories attached. Italian place in a neighborhood between their apartments. Small and warm with checkered tablecloths and wine bottles lining the walls. This feels weird, Isla said once they were seated. Bad weird or good weird? Just weird. 3 weeks ago, we were strangers. 2 weeks ago, we were on opposite sides of a negotiation. Last week, you were helping us build our growth strategy, and now we're on a date. When you put it that way, we're moving very fast. Or very slow, depending on how you count. Isla picked up her menu, then set it down again. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you regret it? Everything that happened with Vanguard? Luca was quiet for a moment, considering. I regret that it had to happen the way it did, that Richard made it ugly. But the outcome? He shook his head. No, I don't regret choosing principle over career. I don't regret choosing you. Even though it cost you everything? It didn't cost me everything. It cost me a job I hated and a future I didn't want. He reached across the table, let his fingers brush hers. And it gave me this, a chance to build something better, with you. The server appeared, took their orders, left them in comfortable silence. Isla watched Luca across the table, more relaxed than she'd ever seen him at Vanguard. Some fundamental tension released from his shoulders, now that he wasn't pretending to be someone he wasn't. Can I ask you something? He said. Always. That first night, in the bar, before you knew who I was, what did you think? Isla smiled at the memory. I thought you were going to be another boring finance bro, all work and no personality. Accurate assessment, honestly. But then you talked about failure like you actually understood it, about paranoia and pressure and the cost of trying to prove yourself. She leaned forward. And I thought maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe you were more than your job title. I thought the same about you. Luca's thumb traced circles on her palm. You walked in looking exhausted and guarded, like you were bracing for another performance. And then you relaxed, laughed. Let me see the person behind the founder persona. We were both pretending, weren't we, that night? No, he said it firmly. We were both being honest for the first time in a long time. We just didn't realize how much it would matter. Their food arrived, pasta for her, risotto for him, and they fell into easier conversation. Work gossip about Maya's latest crisis with their developer. Luca's awkward phone call with his sister explaining why he'd been fired. Plans for the Whitmore partnership rollout. The comfortable rhythm of two people who'd already been through crisis together and found they liked each other on the other side. This is nice, Isla said as they walked back to his car, the city lights reflecting off rain-slick streets. Just nice? Really nice. Best first date I've had in years. Should I be worried about the competition? There is no competition. You set the bar pretty high with the whole sacrifice your career for my company thing. Luca laughed. That wasn't a date move. That was just basic human decency. Still counts. He drove her home, walked her to her door like this was a movie from the 50s. Isla found herself not wanting the night to end, not wanting to go back to her empty apartment and the work waiting on her laptop. Want to come up? She asked. Fair warning, my place is a mess. I've been working late every night. So has mine. But he followed her up anyway. Her apartment was indeed a mess. Papers everywhere, coffee cups on every surface, her cat judging them from the bookshelf. But Luca didn't seem to care. He helped her clear space on the couch, accepted the wine she offered, settled in like he'd been there 100 times before. This is nice too, he said. My disaster of an apartment? No, this. Just being with you without an agenda or a crisis or a meeting scheduled. Isla curled against him, let herself relax for the first time in weeks. We should do this more often. What, have messy apartments? No, just be together, without complications. I thought you liked complicated. I like you more. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Isla felt something settle in her chest. Something that felt like peace. The board meeting started badly and got worse. Ms. Moreno, I need you to explain why we're paying premium consulting fees to Luca Reed. The question came from Martin, one of Whitmore's senior partners, older, traditional, clearly suspicious of the arrangement. Around the conference table, Other partners watched with varying degrees of interest or concern. Isla kept her voice level. Luca has extensive strategic experience and intimate knowledge of our company from his work evaluating us at Vanguard. He's helping us navigate the partnership integration. He's your boyfriend, Martin said it flatly, like he was presenting evidence in court. You're living together as of last week. Don't insult our intelligence by pretending this is purely professional. Heat crept up Isla's neck, but she refused to look away. My personal relationship with Luca doesn't change the quality of his work or the value he brings. It changes the appearance of impropriety. It raises questions about whether you're capable of making objective business decisions. Martin, Claire's voice cut through the tension. I think you're out of line. Am I? We've invested significant capital in this company. We deserve assurance that our founders are prioritizing business over personal entanglements. Maya, sitting beside Isla, leaned forward. Luca's consulting work has been exceptional. We've developed a 3-year growth strategy, identified our key risk factors, and created infrastructure that will support scaling. That's not personal entanglement, that's strategic planning. By someone she's sleeping with, Martin shot back. The room went silent. Isla felt her professional mask crack, anger and humiliation warring for dominance. That's enough. Claire stood, her calm demeanor hardening into something formidable. Isla's personal life is not board business unless it demonstrably affects company performance, which, by all metrics, it hasn't. Her relationship with Luca began after we committed to the investment, and his consulting work has been transparent and valuable. Claire, I'm simply saying, you're simply being invasive and inappropriate. Isla and Maya have been nothing but professional. Their company is meeting every milestone we set. If you have concerns about strategic direction or financial planning, raise those. But stop using personal relationships as a proxy for sexism. Martin's face reddened, but he sat back. The rest of the meeting continued in tense silence, and when it finally ended, Isla felt wrung out. I'm sorry about that, Claire said as the others filed out. Martin is from a different era. He'll adjust or he'll retire. Should I have disclosed the relationship earlier? Isla asked. You disclosed it before anything official happened. That's appropriate. Claire's expression softened. But I want you to hear this. Your company's success doesn't depend on whether you're dating Luca Reed. It depends on your vision, your execution, and your team. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Thank you. Isla left the meeting and went directly to Luca's apartment. He took one look at her face and pulled her inside. Board meeting? He guessed. One of the partners questioned our professional judgment, called our relationship an entanglement. Luca's jaw tightened. I can step back from the consulting work. I don't want to be a liability. No. Isla gripped his arms. You're not the liability. Outdated attitudes are. And Claire backed us up. Still, if my being around is causing problems, your being around is helping. Your work is solid. We're not letting small-minded people dictate our choices. He pulled her close and they stood in his cramped apartment breathing together until the tension finally eased. This is the complicated part, Luca said against her hair. I know. Worth it, though? Absolutely. Luca stood in front of Isla's company, his first official day as a full Whitmore employee instead of a consultant. The office was different from Vanguard. Smaller, scrappier, walls covered in whiteboards full of ideas and post-it notes forming strategies. The energy was different too. Hungry instead of complacent. Collaborative instead of competitive. Maya greeted him at the door. Welcome to the chaos. Conference room is set up for the strategy session. I brought donuts. The good kind or the grocery store kind? The good kind. I'm not a monster. They'd spent the last week establishing clear boundaries. Luca reported to Claire, not Isla. His work supporting Isla's company was one portfolio responsibility among several. He'd also be working with two other Whitmore investments. He and Isla had separate meetings scheduled, separate work streams, separate reporting structures. On paper, it looked clean, professional. In reality, it was messier, because Isla was in the conference room preparing slides, and Luca's first instinct was to help her. Because when they discussed strategy, they slipped into the easy rhythm of two people who knew each other intimately. Because Maya kept giving them knowing looks that suggested their professional boundaries weren't fooling anyone. Okay, Isla said, starting the presentation. Growth targets for Q3. Luca forced himself into professional mode, took notes, asked strategic questions, pushed back on assumptions that needed challenging, ignored the way Isla's eyes lit up when she explained their newest feature, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, all the small tells he'd learned that had nothing to do with business. The meeting ran 2 hours. When it ended, Maya left quickly, too quickly, like she was giving them space on purpose. That was good, Luca said, gathering his notes. You barely contributed. Isla was frowning. Usually you jump in more. I was trying to maintain professional distance. You don't need to be distant. You need to be helpful. She moved closer, voice dropping. I know we set boundaries, but I still trust your strategic judgment. That doesn't change because we're together. Maya left us alone on purpose. She trusts us to figure it out. Luca set his notes down, let himself relax slightly. This is harder than I thought. Being professional when all I want is to kiss me in the conference room? Pretty much. Save it for after work hours. But Isla was smiling. We can do this. Keep work separate, keep personal separate, and only let them blur at the edges. What counts as edges? Strategy sessions where no one else is around, working dinners, celebrating wins. She stood on her toes, pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. That counts as edges. Very unprofessional, Ms. Moreno. Completely inappropriate, Mr. Reed. They both laughed, and it felt like breathing. 6 weeks after the Whitmore deal closed, Isla got an email that changed everything. Not from an investor or a client or a board member, from Luca. Subject, not a grand gesture. I know how you feel about dramatic romantic moments in public displays. I know you prefer practical over sentimental. So this isn't me showing up at your office with a boombox or hiring a billboard. This is just me saying, I found something I think your company needs. Attached was a business proposal, a detailed one. Through his work at Whitmore, Luca had identified a smaller company, design firm with incredible talent, but struggling with business development. Their aesthetic would perfectly complement Isla's product. Their team structure would fit into her existing organization, and they were actively looking for acquisition or merger options. The proposal was thorough. Financial analysis, culture fit assessment, integration timeline, risk mitigation strategies. Everything Isla would need to make an informed decision. It was practical, strategic, completely professional, and somehow the most romantic thing anyone had ever done for her. She called him immediately. Luca, before you say anything, this is real. Not a gift, not a gesture. I genuinely think this makes business sense. It's perfect. Silence on the other end. Then, yeah, this is exactly what we needed. We've been talking about expanding design capabilities, but couldn't justify hiring a full team. This solves that. So you're not mad that I'm inserting myself into your business strategy? I'm mad that you sent this as an email instead of presenting it in person so I could kiss you properly. She heard him laugh. I can fix that. Are you in your office? Come over. He arrived 20 minutes later, slightly breathless from rushing. Isla pulled him into her office, closed the door, and kissed him thoroughly. That, she said when they broke apart, is how you present a strategic opportunity. Noted for future reference. Luca was grinning. So you really think it works? I think it's brilliant. How did you even find them? I've been keeping an eye out for opportunities that fit your growth trajectory. Companies that could complement what you're building instead of competing with it. He looked almost shy. I wanted to help, without overstepping. This isn't overstepping, this is partnership. Isla pulled up the proposal on her computer. Walk me through the numbers. They spent the next hour dissecting the opportunity, financials, timelines, potential pitfalls. Isla called Maya in, and the three of them built out a preliminary integration plan. By the time they finished, it was dark outside, and they'd filled 3 whiteboards with strategy. We should celebrate, Maya said, packing up her laptop. Dinner? The good sushi place? Rain check, Isla said. I think Luca and I have some things to discuss. Maya rolled her eyes. Sure, discuss. That's what we're calling it. She left, and Isla turned back to Luca. This is what I mean, she said. When I said I wanted you in my life. This. You seeing opportunities I miss, bringing me ideas that make my company better, supporting my vision without taking it over. That's just good partnership. It's more than that. Isla moved into his space, let herself be close in a way they couldn't be during meetings. It's you understanding what I need, professionally and personally, and showing up for both. I want to keep doing that, for as long as you'll let me. That sounds suspiciously like a long-term commitment, Mr. Reed. Does it? Maybe it is. Isla kissed him and thought about how far they'd come from that first blind date. From strangers to adversaries to partners to whatever this was, something real and complicated and worth every difficult moment. I'm all in, she said against his mouth. On all of it, the company, the partnership, you. Good, Lucas smiled. Because I've been all in since that first night. When you told me you wanted to be just you, I am just me, with you. Yeah, he pulled her closer. You are. 1 year later, Isla stood in the conference room that had once held their disastrous first meeting. Everything was different now. The company had doubled in size. The design firm acquisition had been successful. They'd hit every milestone in the Whitmore agreement and were already discussing Series B funding. Claire had called them her star portfolio company in the last board meeting, and even Martin had grudgingly admitted they'd exceeded expectations. But today wasn't about business metrics. Today was personal. The door opened, and Luca walked in holding 2 coffee cups. You wanted to meet here? Seemed fitting. Isla took the cup, recognizing her order without needing to ask. This is where it all fell apart, and came back together. Exactly. She set the coffee down, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been even during their worst board meetings. I've been thinking about something. Dangerous territory. Luca, I'm serious. He sat, expression shifting to match hers. Okay, I'm listening. We've spent a year figuring this out. The professional boundaries, the personal relationship, how to be partners in every sense without compromising either aspect. And I think, she stopped, choosing words carefully, I think we're good at it, better than I expected. I agree. So I want to make it official, not just the relationship. I want you as an actual business partner. Equity, board seat, the full deal. Luca went very still. Isla, before you say no, listen. Maya and I have been discussing it for months. We want to expand the strategic advisory side of the business, and you're already doing that work. But you're doing it for Whitmore, not for us. This would bring you into the company properly. That's a huge decision. I know, and I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't sure, if Maya wasn't sure, if we hadn't spent a year watching you prove that you can separate professional judgment from personal feelings. What does Claire think? She thinks it makes sense, as long as we're transparent about the relationship and maintain board oversight. Isla pulled out a folder. She'd come prepared naturally. These are the proposed terms. Fair equity split, clear role definition, all the professional boundaries we'd need. Luca opened the folder, and she watched him read. Saw the moment he realized how much thought had gone into this, how serious she was. You want me to leave Whitmore? He asked quietly. I want you to choose what you actually want, not what's safe or expected or professionally convenient. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment, and Isla felt her heart rate spike. Maybe she'd miscalculated. Maybe this was too much, too fast, too... I want this, Luca said, looking up. I want to build something with you. Not just be adjacent to what you're building, actually build it together. Yeah? Yeah. He smiled and it transformed his face the way it always did. But I have one condition. What? We celebrate properly this time. Not a working dinner, not a strategic planning session, an actual date where we acknowledge that we're doing something terrifying and exciting and completely worth it. Deal. Isla felt relief and joy, and a dozen other emotions crashed through her. Where do you want to go? That bar, where we met, full circle. Fitting. They went that night, sliding into the same corner booth where everything had started. The bartender recognized them immediately. The couple from a year ago, he said, grinning. The ones who looked like they were having the worst first date ever. It got better, Isla said, laughing. Clearly. He set down drinks without being asked. Their orders from that first night, remembered perfectly. These are on the house. For luck. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the decision settling between them. Are we crazy? Isla asked. Mixing business and personal this completely? Probably. Luca picked up his glass. But we've been doing it for a year anyway. Might as well make it official. To terrible decisions that somehow work out? To building something real. They clinked glasses, and Isla thought about the journey that had brought them here. From blind date to business rivals to partners to, whatever they were now, something bigger than either label, something they were still figuring out. I love you, she said, surprising herself with the admission. They danced around those words for months, both too cautious to be the first to say them. Luca set down his glass, reached across the table to take her hand. I love you too. Have since that first night, probably. When you made the rule about no work talk, and I realized you were the first person in years who wanted to know me instead of what I could do for them. I still want to know what you can do for me. I just also want everything else. Greedy. Ambitious. Both, he smiled. We're both ambitious. It's why this works. Among other reasons. Many other reasons. They finished their drinks, left the bar hand in hand, and walked into the city night. Isla looked up at the buildings surrounding them. Same streets, same lights, but everything different from a year ago. Better. She'd taken the biggest professional risk of her life by trusting Luca, and it had turned into the best decision she'd ever made, professionally and personally. Ready? Luca asked, squeezing her hand. For what? Everything. Building a company together, navigating the complications, proving everyone wrong who said this couldn't work. Isla smiled, felt certainty settle in her chest. I'm ready. And she was.